Hey everybody, welcome back to Bibles on a Budget. My name is CJ, and today we are taking a look at something very interesting. A interesting offering from I guess they're a ministry, I'm not sure. It's a publishing house called InterVarsity Publishing, and this is the First Nations version. Over here, it's the indigenous translation of the New Testament. And over here we have the First Nations version, Psalms and Proverbs, which again, it's an indigenous Bible translation. Now, you're probably asking, if you're not really familiar with that term, especially if you're from the States, we say Native Americans, or some of us may even say First Nations people, and that's why it's called First Nations, because this translation is not aimed directly at, lack of a better term, white Americans. This is actually aimed at the natives to the North American continent, which also includes Canada. So I'm an American. Like many Americans, some of us have a little bit of native DNA deep way back in our DNA, I guess you could say. But that doesn't make us a part of the tribe. It just means we happen just to have some DNA. So it's not for me, and perhaps this version is not directed at you unless you are of native lineage, someone who is a part of a native tribe like what we would call the Cherokee or the Ojibwe or something like that. But these are really interesting offerings. So this one, like I said, this is the New Testament, and over here is Psalms and Proverbs. So they do not have the full Bible yet. So a lot of times when you have these new translations, if you remember a few years ago for the Legacy Standard Bible, a lot of times when they're doing these new translations, they always start out with translating the New Testament. And then if it works out well, people receive it well, then they move along to the whole Bible later on. And sometimes they even release the Psalms and Proverbs. But first things, let's talk about the outside. So this is very indicative of the style of different native art, different things, the way that they express themselves creatively. So it's very beautiful. You got these different colors here. Over here we got some greens and reds and like beiges and brown. And then over here we have some blues and some greens and some light blues, kind of this tan color here. So these are very cool. This one is a hardback. This one is a paperback. So this is relatively new. This was released maybe a few years ago, and this one was released, I think, at least this year or maybe last year. I don't have that information on me right now. But let's open this up and I'll show you what the insides of these two. They're not Bibles. This is just the New Testament, and this is just two books of the Bible. This is, one half of the Bible. So we're going to look at the New Testament, and then we're going to look at the Psalms and Proverbs real quick. So again, here is the New Testament. So when you open it up, it is hardback, so you have a paper paste down liner. Really cool, kind of a cool texture there. And then as you go through, you'll find the intro page to the First Nations New Testament. And then here is a little dedication here for for what they're doing here. This is mainly done by a ministry called Rain Ministry. And a man named Terry Wildman is kind of the main guy behind this. He has a bunch of different people working with him. He has a ministry up in Canada called One Book that also works with him. And then InterVarsity Press, I called it InterVarsity Publishing, but it's InterVarsity Press, also worked with them on this. So this is really cool. Then we turn the page and we got the contents. And one thing you're going to notice here is that they have the normal English names of the books here, but above them, you'll notice that they have I don't want to exactly call them the native, or sometimes we call them Indians, but the native names. Basically, what they're doing is, with this translation, they give the name of the book based on what actually the Hebrew means. So remember that many of these books were written by Jews, and those Jews had either Hebrew names, or many of them also had Greek names. So for instance, Matthew is actually a Hebrew name. Mark is a Greek name. Luke is a Greek name. John is a Hebrew name. Acts is just talking about what happened after the Gospels. And then you have the different letters from Paul. And so you can see here, Matthew is called gift from Creator. That's what they call God. They have many different names for God that are very understandable to the natives, which is really cool. So gift from Creator tells the good story. That's what they call the gospel, the good story. War Club tells a good story. That's Mark. Shining Light, Luke. Luke, I believe, does come from Greek, and it does come from Greek, but it means something to do with light. And then John, he shows goodwill, and so on and so forth. My favorite one, though, is what they call Paul. Because if you're not familiar, Paul's name, Paulus, in the Greek actually, I don't think it's Greek, I think it's Latin, because Paul was also a Roman citizen. Paulus means small man, and so they call him small man. So many of the characters that you read about in this New Testament are given that same treatment. So Jesus is called Creator Sets Free. God is called either the Great Spirit, Creator, just many different names. You can actually, there is an intro, and I'm just going to skip through that here. Here is a bit of an introduction to the FNV, the First Nations translation, and they'll give you kind of a little bit of a rundown of what they did. They'll tell you some of the contributors, and they'll tell you what their tribes are, so that you know that this is done by actual natives. These are not just, like, it's not like you have like different, you have one native guy and then you have a bunch of non-natives. You actually have people who are natives. So that's really cool. Now, they have a section here, why English? And one of the reasons why is because it says here, over 90% of First Nations people do not speak their tribal language. Which is sad, because some of their tribal languages are really cool. They're probably older than a lot of the languages we actually speak, because the natives were here long before the Europeans were. So that's really cool. But yeah, it's really cool. It talks about the different types of natives, why English, consultants, and so on. And then here's the section on names of God, which they call Great Spirit, Creator, Great Mystery, Maker of Life, Giver of Life, One above us all, and Most Holy One. And then also over here you have some reader aids. So sometimes they add some things for clarification in the text, but they render it in italics. They also have little spots that help with history, culture, and geography. Because you got to remember that even though this is a translation for natives, again, the Bible itself was written for and by Jews. So they have a completely different culture than the natives, completely different culture than 21st century Americans, Europeans, and so on. But I love this explanation too. This is talking about why they have these naming traditions, the native naming traditions, and using the meanings of names for persons and places in the great story. It's just really cool. I know I'm kind of fumbling over my words, but it's actually really cool. And then you have this little prologue to the New Testament, which kind of explains the story before. So that's really cool. And then we get to the New Testament itself. So here's an interesting thing. It talks about here his tribal ancestry. This is talking about Creator Sets Free. This is Jesus. What's interesting is that in the Jewish religion, you do have tribes, right? They're not as abundant as the different tribes of our native friends, right? There's only 12 tribes, but that's true. His tribal ancestry. He was part of the tribe of Judah. And so you can see here we have already many different names as they are expressed from the Hebrew into the English through the natives' naming traditions. So, for instance, Abraham is called father of many nations. Isaac is called he made us laugh. Heel grabber is Jacob, because if you remember the story of Jacob, Jacob did grab the heel of his brother in the womb, and then just so on and so forth. So you'll see that throughout the whole thing. I will say, as an English speaker, because our tradition is just one word that's a name, I will say that the reading with it's really cool, but it's also very cumbersome, if I'm honest. And again, it's not directed towards me. I am not the intended audience. So yeah, take that as you will. But again, if you look at these and you can kind of figure out, oh, that's what that name means, because right after it'll say it in the parentheses. So this is what the format looks like. It is a double column paragraph format. It's got a dividing line. This is how they do the chapter numbers. And then you got this nice kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of a blocky font, but I really like this. It's very fitting for the style of the translation. And then this is really cool. So they do have some cross references here. But the thing about it is, again, there is no Old Testament. So there is no Old Testament for this yet. So, you can look at these and then you can go back to a different Bible that's not this version and read it. Now, again, even though this is not for me as a non-native, right, a non-Native American, a non-First Nations person, I do find a lot of the translations very helpful. I actually consult it sometimes in my Bible study because I like looking at other translations and seeing what other Bibles have to say, how scholars of these different Bibles and different translators, rendered things. So this is more on what I would say, this is more of a dynamic equivalency. So this is more like NLT, NIV kind of style. So this is not word for word, because if this was word for word, you wouldn't have certain words in here. Like, for instance, you may find this word here. This is a very, pardon my speech, but this is a very Indian word, fry bread. Let me see if I can actually get that up there for you guys. Fry bread. And then you'll also see words like TP, chief. You'll see very specific words that are specific to the natives. And so, yeah, and then you do have these little historical things here blocked off. These are not a part of the text themselves. They're kind of blocked off, so that's really cool. These little elements, because you got to remember that they're talking about this as the good story. So there are little explanation-y bits. They're not notes like study, because it's not a study Bible, but you do have those in there. So that's the Gospels, and then here's Revelation, which they call the Book of Great Revealing, because the actual book's name in Greek, Apocalypse, actually means revealing, and so that's why we call it the Book of Revelation. So there's the Book of Revelation. You do have a glossary at the back, glossary of biblical terms. So they're talking about here, like they use the word bad hearts and bad ways for sin. Apostle, then they explain what that is, a message bearer. So there's cool Passover festival, which is just Passover, festival weeks, festival shelters, chosen one, gathering house, day of resting, sacred or ceremonial lodge. Because this is relating to the natives and the words and the things they use in English. Sacred family, which is church, spiritual warfare, spiritual messengers, and so on and so forth. And then in the back, there's no maps, but you do have just this really simple call out here. So if you want more information, you can go to firstnationsversion.com, or you can go to their Facebook page for the First Nations version. So that's that's the New Testament, and this is really cool. You kind of get a sneak peek on the back of these verses. Now we're going to take a brief look at the Psalms and Proverbs. So this is recent. This is completely new. You can see on the back, doesn't say what the price was. I actually thought, because some Bibles do have that on the back and some don't, so this doesn't. So here it is. Again, it's an indigenous translation. So this is paperback, so it's not Smythe's Own. So again, dedication, you got the copyright page, the contents. This is called Story of the Book of Sacred Songs. So it's going to be talking about Psalms, and then Sacred Songs is Psalms. Story of the Book of Wise Sayings and Wise Sayings, which is Proverbs, which is interesting. There actually is a section in Proverbs which talks about wise sayings. So that's really interesting. So here's the introduction to this, just explaining again the people who worked on it, more about the First Nation, the translation process, why English, the names of the Supreme Being, use of italics, Hebrew name for God, gender and the Great Spirit, and so on and so forth. And here's a little explanation, basically an introduction to the Book of Psalms. And then you got the Book of Psalms here, which is usually, as Psalms is in a lot of Bibles, it is verse by verse, and it is double column, but you just have the different ones. So here I have, this is completely new, so you are joining me in this thing completely blind. I'm completely blind. So this is really interesting. So one thing that I notice already right off the bat is that there's this mention of grandfather. And so I'm sure, let me go back actually. So I'm sure that for some reason they use grandfather. So Jewish people have a sacred name for Great Spirit, a name traditionally would not speak out loud. We honored this tradition in the First Nations version for Psalms and Proverbs and replaced the name of Yahweh with grandfather, a First Nations term for the Great Spirit used by many tribes and nations. Most English translations use Lord in small capital letters in the place of YH, WH. And then if you want to learn why they chose grandfather, we can go back to the Hebrew words and cultural metaphors. So that's really useful because within Christianity, we have this thing that we are not God's grandchildren, we are His children. So that's a very interesting. Some people, the use of grandfather, again, might rub people the wrong way, but you got to remember, if you're not native, this is not intended, the way that they're rendering this is not intended for you. But again, so you got the Psalms, so that's really cool. They talk about the much loved one, which is David. And and this contains all 150 Psalms, including Psalms 119. And what's cool is you do have the different Hebrew letters. This is called an acrostic, if I remember correctly, an acrostic poem. So that means that in Hebrew, each section starts with that letter. So this section will start with A. This section will start with B. This one will start with G. This one will start with D, and so on. And then we go into the Book of Wise Sayings, which again, this is the start of it. Solomon is called Stands in Peace in this. So this is Wise Sayings. So now, so it talks about grandmother wisdom. So again, we can go back to the back to see why. But I want to see here what classic passage Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is. From the strength of your heart, put all your trust in grandfather, and do not hold yourself up with weak human thinking. As you walk the road of life, make every step a prayer. Grandfather will make your eyes straight and your paths safe. So that's really interesting. That's a good thing in the sense that, everywhere you go, you always want to trust the Lord. And then don't be wise in your own eyes. Treat grandfather with great respect and turn back on evil ways. So that's that. So let's go to the back and we're going to look at the cultural metaphors because I'm really curious about this whole grandfather thing. So there's that. I'm going to read this on my own time because this is a lot. I didn't realize that this was actually a lot. So this is going to give you a lot of information on why they did this. So that's really useful. So if you're somebody who is not native, but you wish to understand, you want a new translation, but you also wish to understand how the natives do their thing, then definitely check this out. Pick this up. I think you should look at this. So that's my recommendation. If you're somebody who's wanting to understand the natives, you're curious about this, you saw this, you're like, man, I'm not a native, but I'm curious about it. I want to see what this says. I want to see what this is about. Because no one is going to stop you if you're a non-native. You don't have to prove your ancestry to buy this. If you this is really good if you are somebody who works in a native context. If you work on a reservation here in the States and you're trying to relate God to the people, but they have a certain cultural understanding about certain things, this can help break that barrier so that they can better understand God. And if I've said anything throughout this review, this look at, that is wrong, please forgive me. I am just your average American who doesn't know too much about the natives, but I think that this is very important. This is really good. Again, this is not for me. In terms of this is not geared towards me. I wanted to have copies of these because I thought they were cool, and I'm always down to have a new version of the Bible just to check and see, to expand my understanding. So thank you guys so much for watching. You can pick these up on Amazon. I got this from Barnes & Noble. I'm not sure. Maybe your local Barnes & Noble might have First Nations version hardback New Testament. If not, check Amazon. You can probably find it on Christian Books. You can also go to Rain Ministries website. And like I showed you in the back of this Bible, and I think it's also in the back of this one, you can go to their website. InterVarsity Press also, I think, is a good place. So I'll try to link a lot of that down in the description so you guys don't have to go fishing for those links. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video from Bibles on a Budget. And remember, folks, and I'm going to try to straighten this up, the truth does not have to be expensive. See you in the next one.